Hi Homeworthy, I'm Violet Manners, welcome to Belvoir Castle.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Violet Manners and I am the founder of HeritageXplore. So HeritageXplore was really born out of, I spent 3 years on the road with my mum and very much a side hustle for us both. My mum's the CEO of Belvoir and I'm the CEO of my business HeritageXplore now. But 3 years ago, I had a marketing agency and we went off on the road for 3 years, really looking to draw the stories out of these historic buildings into a modern medium for particularly younger audiences all over the world to really soak up and learn more about these historic houses that are still family owned and run, and also just hear about the incredible people that have gone before us. Because invariably there's just so many stories that exist in these historic buildings, and so often they're stuck in kind of dense text. And in making that series for 3 years and visiting all of these historic houses, I sort of discovered that there was so many shared challenges and opportunities that exist in this independent sector of heritage. And I was so excited by the opportunity to try and really bring these independent houses that are not a part of other organisations in this country called, for example, the National Trust or English Heritage. I really wanted to create the kind of National Trust 2.0, all of the houses that are still independently owned and run, loved and lived in by families still today. I wanted to bring them into one digitalised platform and really make it much more seamless for people that are visiting this country to visit them. And so here we are, 4 years later. HeritageXplore was born last year. We're really delighted and grateful to have the opportunity to champion these historic houses collectively to the rest of the world. So technically speaking, our family have been here since 1066. We came over with William the Conqueror. This castle that we're sitting in right now dates back to the early 19th century. It was created by the 5th Duchess Elizabeth. She had actually been brought up at another castle about 2 hours north of here called Castle Howard. And she famously arrived here to a rather sort of square, I think very beautiful, but sort of square Charles II castle. And she didn't find it hugely romantic. And she famously was said to have said to her husband, if I am to leave Castle Howard and move down here and call this my home, there will have to be some work done. And I don't think he could have envisaged the kind of work that she actually intended. She virtually took the previous Charles II castle to the ground and rebuilt it brick by brick, using a lot of the stone from the Charles II castle. That's why Belvoir is actually 2 different colours on either side of the castle. One side is the stone from the Charles II castle. The sort of ironstone, which is a lot softer and more porous, is actually from her reign. So she commissioned James Wyatt to build this castle, Belvoir, and it really is kind of a castle that you could almost see in a Disney movie. It's got all of the turrets. It sits on a top, a hill, a man-made hill, surveying the landscape around it. You can see the castle from up to sort of 20 miles away, and it's got this huge sort of romantic setting with woodlands around it that were all designed by the very famous landscaper Capability Brown. So it really is, it's Elizabeth's vision, and she, for a woman of her day to be left with a budget that she was left with and the manpower that she was left with to build something like this is totally and utterly unheard of for her generation. So as a result, she's played a huge role in my mother's time as the custodian here with my father, because my mother was always thought of Elizabeth as sort of being on her shoulder and kind of guiding her, because she's just so formidable. She really is woven into the fabric of this building, and she designed the entire thing with a very famous architect called James Wyatt. So it's hugely romantic, it's hugely sort of fairy-tale-like in its design. It's hugely unpractical for the 21st century, but they weren't, I imagine, thinking that it would still be standing in many ways, probably 200 years later, but it very much is. And another kind of interesting aside or fun fact that I love about Belvoir is that some may have noticed we call it Belvoir, but in fact it's spelt Belvoir. And in French, Belvoir means beautiful view. And the castle was originally named, this is way back in kind of Anglo-Saxon times, when Robert de Tordini, my great ancestor who fought with William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, by his side and helped him win the battle, William the Conqueror gifted him this land that the castle and subsequent castles have been created on. And one kind of interesting aside is that obviously the French were here sort of dominating, English people and the land around Belvoir. And so as a bit of a sort of snub to Robert de Tordini, who arrived here as a Frenchman, they decided to call it Belvoir and not its original French name, Belvoir. So I'm afraid it stuck, and we still call Belvoir and not Belvoir. But I think my dad's on a sort of 20-year campaign to try and get it being called Belvoir again, and so there's been no success as of yet. But it's a fun fact and fun aside, and a nod to our French heritage and history that exists in the family and in the castle as well. The castle as a whole is really a Regency revival style with a bit of a Gothic twist. So you'll notice as we go around the castle later, you'll see that there's huge nods to a kind of Gothic-inspired style as you enter the castle through the portico doors, and then it moves into this really romantic Regency-era and period that's inspired rooms like the Elizabeth Saloon, Regent's Gallery, and a few others that we'll show you later. It's a wonderful kind of mismatch, but it was built and finished in 1825. It was a labour of love by the 5th Duchess. We never quite agree on how many rooms there are actually on the castle, but I like to think, and this is based on fact, I'm not sort of just making this up, but there's approximately about 320 rooms. Some think there's slightly more, others think there's slightly less, so I like to sort of aim for the middle and say 320. But they're all of varying shapes, forms. There's 5 big sort of staterooms, but then in fact, the majority of the castle are wonderful rooms like this that are big and beautiful, but they're not sort of overwhelmingly big like some of the others. So it's a huge and kind of wonderful mishmash of different styles over the centuries that have been brought together. This is the Elizabeth Howard room, and it is kind of extraordinary. This was done in collaboration with Colfax and Fowler and de Gournay. My mother worked with them for 2 years, and this wallpaper is actually entirely based off a wallpaper that currently and has long existed in another bedroom called the Wellington Room. And the Wellington Room was created when the castle was built by the 5th Duchess. And as you'll see, the wallpaper in the Wellington Room is actually, unfortunately, due for a huge amount of restoration work. But de Gournay very cleverly replicated the wallpaper and just changed the colour of it. And this is now the wallpaper that you can see. So it's called the Howard wallpaper. You can actually, funnily enough, de Gournay and Belvoir have done a collaboration, so you can actually buy the Howard wallpaper. But this room was called the Brown Room. It had a brown carpet and brown walls and a gold bed. And the bed has remained exactly as was, with these incredible lion heads on the beds, which I'm so relieved that they kept. But everything else that you can see has been either recovered and remade. So this and these chairs have all been recovered and remade. The bed has been completely redone with the most incredible detail and curtaining that you've ever seen. And I think probably one of my favourite features is actually these curtains, because they are just incredible linen and silk plumes that hang off enormous windows in here. So it's a very special room. It was not this special up until de Gournay and Colfax and Fowler did their thing. So we're so grateful that they managed to recreate one of the castle's most famous wallpapers. And the traditional Wellington wallpaper is being restored hopefully next year, which is very exciting. But yeah, it's beautiful, very girly, but very beautiful. So we are now in the Elizabeth Howard suite. And this was actually very, very recently done. So you're some of the first few people to see this in real life in a video format. And we're currently in the dressing room of the Elizabeth Howard room. But as you can see, it's recently been redone in collaboration with Colfax and Fowler and de Gournay. And Colfax came up with so many genius ideas for this room. My favourite being the velvet purple, very rich wallpaper. So instead of having traditional wallpaper, obviously as paper, they went for a velvet fabric, which I think just really makes you feel like you're being kind of swallowed up by the room when you walk in, and it's just such a rich, deep purple, which we actually don't really have much of this colour at all throughout the rest of the castle. So it's a really amazing and very clever Colfax and Fowler touch. Welcome to the chapel at Belvoir. So I'm going to start with this figure here, this tomb. And this is actually the tomb of Robert de Tordini. It was brought here by the 9th Duke, so my great-great-grandfather. And it is really Robert that we have to thank for this incredible plot of land that the castle sits on today. Robert was William the Conqueror's right hand in the Battle of Hastings. We came over with the French, we were French originally. And so Robert died in 1088. But as I said, his tomb was brought here by the 9th Duke. And he's were it not for him being so successful in the Battle of Hastings, Belvoir would not be situated here. It's also Robert de Tordini that gave the castle its name, Belvoir, beautiful view. So he's a very important figure that mustn't be missed in the chapel. And this is the remainder of the chapel. So the chapel's used for a lot of sort of family services that include all of the people that live in the surrounding area and villages. It's also used for weddings. I'm getting married later this year. I won't be using the chapel, unfortunately, but it can be used for weddings, and it's an amazing location to get married. And I think probably my favourite thing of all in this chapel is this incredible monument that was carved by so this is of Lord Robert Haddon, and he was the son of the 7th Duchess Violet, who I'm named after. And tragically, he died at the age of 9, bouncing on the bed with his brother. And they later discovered it was because of a twisted gut. But Violet was a great artist, and lots of the sculptures that you see around the castle are by Violet's own hand. And this took her almost 14 years to carve and create. And she did so in one of the rooms, which is now named the Tapestry Room. But his effigy lay there, and she hand-carved this tomb. This is actually not the original. The original is with my aunt and uncle at their house called Haddon Hall in Derbyshire. So this is a copy. But it's a pretty extraordinarily moving piece of art, really. And she did it to obviously capture his memory. And he looks so at peace in that effigy that she created and carved. But I think it's such a testament to her grief and also her incredible talent and skill as an artist of her day. Yeah, the chapel is sort of in the heart of the castle. Obviously, like all churches in England, every church in England is always in the shape of a cross. This is in some ways no different. It technically is in the shape of a cross as well. And it's a beautifully space that's still regularly used, which is how they should be, really. My favourite room, I think, in the castle, although it's really difficult to pick one because there's so much beauty and ingenuity and kind of like creative flair that exists in all the rooms, and it's so interesting. Everyone has a different favourite room very often, which I love hearing about. But one of my favourite rooms, and one I thought I'd share because Homeworthy is, of course, a US channel, and I wanted to but it's an interesting part of our family's history with America. So when we go into the guard room later, you'll see, but there's flags that hang above the guard room when you walk in. And as you'll notice, they are turning to dust, very slowly, but they are turning to dust. But they were actually, during the War of Independence, the English were sent over to fight with France over the Tobago Island, and we lost. And it was actually my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather that led the troops into battle over Tobago. The regiment was called Fight and Foot. And in 1783, we lost. We were held captive in the Caribbean for a year before finally being released by the French. And we came back to England, and the regiment was disbanded. And the flags that they went into battle with were returned to the castle because it was the 4th Duke here who created the platoon. And so the flags hang in the old guard room, and as you'll notice, they're very dusty, a little bit moth-eaten, and will never ever be touched because I don't know if you've ever heard of the expression, old soldiers never die, they only ever fade away. But that's a very common expression. And as a result, we want to honour and continue to honour the soldiers that fought in that battle and lost by allowing the flags to just fade away and turn into dust. So they're the only piece of the castle that will never be touched or restored for that very reason. So I think the guard room's just got so many clever features to it. Fireplace has no chimneys, and that's because the 5th Duchess was keen for the guard room to have more natural light, and so the fires at both ends of the guard room actually go up into the floor of the four-taker landing and actually create an underfloor heating system and ensure that there's greater natural light because, of course, all the lanterns would have been oil lit. So that kind of thing. I think the guard room is one of those rooms that everyone walks through when they enter the castle. It's the first room you see. So it's very easy to walk through it and not notice all of these kind of clever design features. So we are in the pre-guard room of Belvoir, and this is the same guard room that everyone walks through when they enter the castle and they arrive here. There are a couple of things that I love about this room, but my first would have to be Pete, who's behind you. So Pete is 10,000 years old. He comes from Ireland. He was discovered in a peat bog in Ireland, hence the name Pete. And we believe he is from when the UK and Europe were connected with a bridge of land. And he was a gift to the 4th Duke of Rutland, who was the Viceroy of Ireland and was hugely popular in his time over in Ireland. And he's been at the castle forever, but it's extraordinary to think the size that he would have been if you look at the horns and the width of them on his head. And he's just one of the many characters that tell a big part of Belvoir's story here at the castle, and he's one of my favourites. So now we are in the guard room. So we've just been from the pre-guard room into the guard room. And the guard room really was obviously the first main room that people entered into and have done for centuries. And there are a couple of really special things that I love about this room. So I think I may have mentioned earlier, but Elizabeth had a real eye for detail. And when designing the castle, the fireplaces at either end of the room, you may notice there's no chimney. And this is in fact because the smoke directly from the fire is going up and heating the entirety of what we call the 40-acre landing here above us. So you might say it was the sort of first ingenious attempt at underfloor heating. I also mentioned the flags that, as you can see, are very, very, very slowly fading away and being allowed to return to dust. And this is in honour of the soldiers that lost their lives during the battle between England and France, which the 4th Duke of Rutland led in the Caribbean over Tobago. And so it's that famous old adage, they will return to dust and be allowed to fade away, to honour the soldiers that fell at battle. But the guard room is just one of those rooms that is so impressive. There's swords on every corner of the room that were previously obviously actually in use. And I love this kind of ingenious design feature that Elizabeth created, circulating energy and air, hot air around the castle to keep it heated, which was obviously an ongoing battle for every successive generation. The castle now has a wood chip burner off-site, which heats the castle, so any surplus wood from the estate actually goes into the wood chip burner and heats it today. But this was just one of her many geniuses sort of creating this wonderful underfloor heating for the castle. The castle's really hugely evolved over the course of its lifetime. Every generation that comes in, has its own way of doing things, and it's much like anyone, frankly, buying a house, you want to put your own stamp on it. And to be honest, the castle's been no different. There are certain aspects and elements of the castle, like the library, the Elizabeth saloon, the state dining room. There's so many rooms, those staterooms, that really you want to be so respectful of the integrity of the interior design. So you would never look to touch or change really any of those huge staterooms. All you're simply wanting to do is keep the restoration program ongoing and ensure that the designs that have been created when the castle was built are maintained and sustained as best as they possibly can be. But that's where I think it means families and subsequent families to come and previous generations can have a lot of fun with the private side of the family home. This room, in fact, that we're in now, the private drawing room, this was really the 7th Duchess Violet. It was her sort of design. She actually knocked the walls through, create the sort of larger drawing room. It was actually all wooden panels, this room, but obviously now no longer is. So everyone comes in with their own interpretation of the castle and its sort of period. But as I said, the main thing is really ensuring the staterooms are kept intact and restored and maintained, and then the bits around the sides you can kind of have a bit more fun with. And we have an American foundation which my mother launched last year, and that really aims to restore various towers and sort of turrets in the castle back to use, because they haven't been used really since pre-World War I. And going up to those towers is like it's another world. It's like stepping back in time. It's like going back to the sort of 1920s. And that's a huge restoration project that my mother is overseeing and the American Foundation is supporting, and it's a huge sort of ongoing project. It hasn't started yet, starting hopefully in 26. It's ever evolving. These places have to if they're going to survive, really. So we are currently in the Elizabeth Saloon, and this room has got so many stories attached to it. So I'm going to have to just sort of narrow the focus and tell you a few of my own. Historically, and most recently in history, this room is actually where Winston Churchill, on the day that he discovered, on the 11th of December in 1936, when he discovered that King Edward VIII was in fact abdicating, he discovered it in this very room and was reportedly told and burst into tears in this very room. So that's its most recent history, which I find extraordinary to think. But also, this is a room that actually is entirely attributed to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, who commissioned the castle to be built, very sadly died only 4 years after its completion. There was a huge fire during the building of this castle, which meant that obviously it put the building of it back by a number of years. And her husband built this room really as a mausoleum to her. So you can see on the ceiling a painting of Elizabeth and a portrait of her, and a portrait of her husband is directly opposite. And all of the children that you can see on the ceiling with wings on them are the children that sadly died. She had 9 children, and the children without wings on them are the children that survived. She had 4 children that survived. So this is a really special room, and it feels like a mausoleum. It's got a sort of wonderful feeling to it when you're inside of it. And another fun, secret little section of the Elizabeth Saloon. So in every corner of this room, the panels actually are removable. And these are satin pin boards. And the idea being that after dinner, the state dining room is opposite this room. After dinner, they would come and pin the name or secret message to someone that they were wanting to onto this pin board here. So I used to jokingly say it was kind of like the original Tinder or Bumble, but obviously they were doing it to just sort of share secrets really with each other. But it was all done in secret. Their ladies in waiting would have come through and pinned a letter to the guest of their choice. So it's a sort of secret little feature of the room. And the incredible gilded fireplaces are also an amazing feature. The family crest is a peacock, and so you can see there are peacocks sort of. Once you realise that the family crest is a peacock, you'll see they're absolutely everywhere. They're in every corner of this room in gold gilding. So it's a pretty spectacular room. It was meant to be awe-inspiring. They designed it to be awe-inspiring, and it certainly is. So the Elizabeth Saloon, I think I mentioned earlier, but the castle's ever ongoing in its restoration projects. And as you can see, this carpet is in need of some serious restoration, and it's actually all the same down there. So I mentioned, but we launched this American Foundation, my mother did, last year, and all of the funds for that are actually going towards the restoration of this carpet in particular. And it will be hung, all of the furniture will be removed, and it will be hung on a huge kind of, almost looks like a washing line in this room, and it will have 10 people, and it'll take them 2 years to hand stitch the carpet back together. So that kind of that just gives you an idea of the kind of level of restoration work that's required to work on these kind of centuries-old carpets. Really, they're tapestries in many ways. The kind of level of creativity and detail that's required could be compared to a tapestry and restoring a tapestry. But it's going to be a huge project. It will mean this room's out of use for 2 years. But it has to be done. So this is the reality of living in a castle in the 21st century. It's a never-ending kind of to-do list of restorative work, and the carpet's a great example of that, really. We moved here in 1999, and my mum and dad had to do a huge amount to sort of make it really feel like a family home. My grandparents had previously been here until my grandfather died. And it was, of course, a family home, but it just had a very different feeling to what it does now. So simple things like putting in a family kitchen was all sort of the ingenuity of my mother. But growing up here was, we all, I think as children, we all sort of wonder what it would be like watching a lot of Disney, as we did. We all wonder what it would be like to sort of move or live in a castle. And of course, having grown up in a house just down the road from here originally and then moving up here, I remember sort of saying to my mum when we were up on the roof at sort of 11 o'clock at night, I was a 10-year-old girl and my sister I think was 8, And Mum was sort of making us put our hands in the drain pipes to pull out the dead pigeons that were blocking the pipes and leading to a leak in the library. And I remember turning to my mum and saying, "Mum, this is not the castle that I signed up to," or something like that. Because you have these dreams about what it is like, and of course there's so much of it that is so magical. But there's a huge amount of work that has to go on to, keep a place like this on the road or intact in the 21st century. So invariably, the changing climate that we all are sort of having to cope with has a direct impact on buildings like this, as do many, many other things on a day-to-day basis. So it was definitely magical in so many ways, and also, very different, I think, to what people perhaps imagine, because there's a huge amount of upkeep, and we were all very made aware of just how much upkeep there really was from an early age. And really the job is, as my mum would say, it's really not for me to say, because I won't inherit Belvoir, but it's just, ensuring that you pass it down in a better condition than you found it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and still, still very much is, but it also is a huge responsibility at the same time. So I know that every generation wears that responsibility differently, and it will be my brother who inherits, and it'll be interesting to see how his journey of sort of being the custodian here will be. So we are now in the state dining room of Belvoir, and as the name kind of suggests, this is the grand room in which many, many, many sort of huge sort of state dinners would have happened historically. Margaret Thatcher was a great friend of my grandfather's, and so she would have been hosted in here, Winston Churchill, etc. They would all have sat and eaten around this very same table. The table actually kind of, again, like, they had such ingenuity back in those days, and the table can extend to fit many, many more people around it. But in today's age, it's used for family use. It's also used a lot for private tours. So HeritageXplore, my business, we're doing this wonderful tour of historic houses, and everyone will be eating around this table in black tie on one of the evenings of that tour. So it's a particularly cool space. And as you can see on the ceiling, there's this incredible detail. So all of these florets have been created, and the kind of fun fact about them is that not any single one is the same. So they are all, in fact, different to one another. It's very easy to look at them and think they all look identical, but in fact, every single floret on the ceiling is totally different to the other. And this is a sort of standout feature of the state dining room here. It's a silver christening bath, and it's kind of family tradition that we've all, at some point in our lives, collectively, with our brothers and sisters, had a picture taken in the silver bowl. But it was traditionally used for christenings and has the family crest carved into the bottom of it. And it's just so beautifully made, and it's solid silver. So it's a very special piece that we love very dearly. And that's actually the picture of us as children in the silver bowl. So these two portraits this is the 4th Duke of Rutland, who was in fact the son of the 3rd Duke of Rutland. And both were huge sort of wartime heroes, really, of their day. So the 4th Duke of Rutland, as I mentioned earlier, led his regiment, the 1st and Foot, into one of many battles that he was involved with, but in particular the one against France and the Caribbean over the Tobago Islands, and on behalf of His Majesty the King. And so he was also the Viceroy of Ireland. So he, as you can see in the painting, he's very, very much sort of, he's got all of the regalia on him. I imagine that would have been a very heavy outfit to wear. But he is appropriately dressed for someone of his stature and his time. And then this is John the Marquis of Granby, and he was also very famous in his day for ultimately leading the Blues, ended up sort of leading the Blues and Royals, which is a regiment in this country. And a really wonderful fun fact about him is he was much loved by all of his troops that marched with him. And as a result, he supposedly has got the most pubs in the United Kingdom in this country are named after this man here. So if you ever see a pub named the Marquis of Granby or Granby, it is after John the Marquis of Granby, because he was so loved. And after people had stopped fighting and obviously had very little to do, he took it upon himself to start giving people essentially houses that were then turned into pubs to give them a livelihood and give them something to do after being in the army for a significant period of their life. So historically, he's got a kind of wonderful history and is much loved. But yeah, he's a huge figure historically. And there's a painting, this very same painting actually exists in St James's Palace in London as well. So he's a big figure. All of us are kind of, I guess we definitely sort of classify ourselves, I think, now as adults. So I think we're all kind of mostly flying the nest and doing our own thing. So lots of us live in London. One of my sisters lived in America up until quite recently. But then, when we come back and we all get together, a typical day will involve, spending a lot of time we've got lots of dogs. We've got about 6 or 7 dogs. So a lot of time will be spent outside with those dogs, taking them for long walks. A huge amount of time will be spent in our family kind of kitchen and our sitting room over there. And really, there's just so much to do up here when we're at home. There's clay pigeon shooting, there's fishing, so it really varies. Everyone sort of has their own thing that they love doing when they come home. Given that I spend so much time in London and at my desk, I just like getting out, be it on a horse or going for a long walk and just trying to get some exercise in at the weekends. But we tend to sort of all get together quite often up here, which is great. So we've been used in a lot of movies and TV series over the last 10 years in particular. I think all historic houses have in the last 10 years. Period drama's just enjoying such a renaissance worldwide, and historic houses are so grateful for it. Belvoir specifically has had some amazing films made at it. So we were the home of The Crown from seasons 1 to 3. So Belvoir was the replica for Windsor in The Crown. And the reason being was that the same architect, James Wyatt, who built Windsor Castle, also built Belvoir Castle. In fact, Windsor was built just after Belvoir. And so you'll notice the round tower at Windsor Castle that's very famous. We have exactly the same round tower here at Belvoir. So the Crown director spotted that very cleverly and then used Belvoir as a replica. So The Crown, we've had the Da Vinci Code, we've had Queen Victoria and Albert, both. There's 2 Victoria movies that have been made. One with Judi Dench, the whole thing was made here. And likewise, the Queen Victoria and Albert that featured Emily Blunt and Rupert Friend, that was also made here. We've had Bridgerton, we made a very small appearance in Bridgerton. So many, to be honest. It's just, Little Lord Fauntleroy is probably the oldest and most well known. I don't know if you can still watch that on Amazon, but it's so worth watching. It's a very, very funny series. But no, it's been the home to so many incredible movies, and I think, as I said, it's just incredibly important that these places continue to be, hopefully. Hello and welcome to the Picture Gallery at Belvoir. So this again is a really magnificent stateroom, huge amount of landscape and portraiture hanging on the walls in here. I won't take you through all of it because there's a lot, but a few of my favourite portraits are the one of my family, which was done probably now about 15 years ago by a Russian artist, actually, and you can see we all look a lot younger, and some of us a little less pleased than others to be sort of sitting for the painting. My grandmother, my dad's mother in the white dress, she was a great beauty of her day, Frances. And then Violet, my namesake, who's on the left, who was the 7th Duchess. And she was quite a prolific woman for her day. She was a leader of something called the Souls in the late 1800s, early 1920s, and a great beauty of her day and a great artist. So she is the Duchess that carved that effigy of her son, Lord Haddon, who sadly died, in the chapel. And lots of sculptures that you can see around the castle are all by her hand. And then this is my second favourite painting. This is by an artist called Peter Coke van Ulst, and it's the oldest painting in the castle. It's from 1527, and it's of the Last Supper. And you can see the 2 dogs under the table are actually fighting over religion. And this is obviously at the time of the great battles over religion in this country between Catholics and Protestants. But it's a pretty famous painting worldwide, not least for its age. And the reason we were able to actually ensure that we were correct about the age of this painting is by the woodwork. So they actually, a number of years ago, dismantled the painting from the frame and discovered that the frame was in fact from the 1500s. So that's how they were able to verify the age of the painting itself. But it's a pretty remarkable painting, and one of many in this room, but it tells so many stories within one painting. But I think my favourite is the fact that the dogs are meant to be fighting over religion under the table, which is quite a fun one. Hi and welcome to the library. So the library, as you can see, it's got a very well-stocked bar. It's very much still used. Very often when there's a private group here taking the castle or a family event. The library is often used for drinks in the evening, for the sort of early drinks before dinner. So it's still a room that's very much in use, but it is an extraordinary room. The oldest book in this room is believed to be from 1487, and it's currently undergoing a huge restoration project that's going to take 16 years. So every single book that you can see on the shelves, I'm afraid I don't know the exact number, but they are all under this huge 16-year restoration project to be cleaned, ensure there's no damp, so it requires a dusting of every single page in every single book to ensure that it's not gathering dust, it's not holding on to any excessive water or damp. So it's a rather big project, but it's one of the most spectacular rooms, and I love sofas like this that mean you can sit and enjoy a conversation with someone on the other side whilst enjoying a martini is sort of how I think the library, that's when the library really comes to life in those kind of settings. And next door is actually the snooker table and snooker room. It was originally always put there, but it's an incredible space and very comfortable and warm, and obviously has a featured fire. Similar kind of thing. There's no fireplace. It actually goes up and then ultimately goes across to heat the underfloor. Yeah, it's a great place for playing backgammon, and we love sharing it with people that come here and take the castle for a private event. And it's probably one of my favourite rooms, I think, in the castle. My interaction with Belvoir sort of in terms of business is really as it relates to HeritageXplore. But I know that my mum has got hugely exciting projects underway. My dad also. So my mum, as I mentioned earlier, launched this American foundation last year. And really she did so with a view to do up these remaining towers, which have never been touched since the 1920s. So that's a huge and ongoing project that's starting hopefully at the end of this year, beginning of next year. And that will involve it's an enormous project, 2 or 3 towers being redone. So it's rewiring, plumbing, you name it, it's happening up there. And another really exciting thing that is happening as well is all of the sort of restoration work happening with the carpet up in the Elizabeth saloon. That's a beautiful room that was created by Elizabeth, who built the castle, her husband, as a mausoleum really for her, because she died 4 years after the castle was complete. And that carpet, you may notice, is in desperate need of restorative work, having just been enjoyed and used by family and also many, many other sort of groups over the last sort of 15 to 20 years. So that's a huge project. That will take 10 people 2 years to hand stitch back together. So it's an enormous project. My mum's written several books. I'm not sure if she has another one in the pipeline, but she often does have an idea of one. And my dad is spending the course of 10 years, I think he's 3 years in, to digitalising the archives here. So we have 5 rooms here at the castle that are archives. And he's worked out it will take him 4 days a week for 10 years to digitalise the entirety of those archives. So it's not a small project, and it's going to take a bit of time, but it's a really important one because, God forbid anything were to happen to the castle, those documents would still be documented and digitalised, which is keeping them safe for generations to come. So there's a lot, but I'm probably mentioning about half of what there really is going on here in the next year or so, but it's ever evolving and so many moving parts. And I haven't even really mentioned any of the work that goes on the landscape around the castle, but that's a huge and ongoing project as well. And this is our family drawing room. So this is very much a space that is, used for family mostly. It's where we celebrate Christmas, and we spend a lot of time here when we're all back. But as I mentioned, we're all definitely now technically have flown the nest and are in London and all over the world. But this is sort of where we reconvene together. And this room was actually created by the 7th Duchess, Violet. As I mentioned, it was sort of originally all wooden panelling. And she decided to strip the panelling off and actually just have it as painted walls, which I think makes it look a lot lighter. And there is a terrace on this side of the room, so it gets a lot of natural light. So it's wonderful that she sort of thought that through and created this really light and airy space. And my mum repainted it actually when we moved here in 1999. But it's got so many sort of personal, wonderful features. It's got lots of paintings and drawings and pictures of our family, and it really is a sort of home, this is our home space. But it's still, surrounded by portraits of our ancestors and some really wonderful history, but it feels as though that you're kind of in the sort of heart of the home here when you're in this room. And yeah, it's full of memories, so we love this room a lot. So another sort of fun thing in this room, which is my dad's love of flying. So he's got this complete obsession with planes, and he calls this his honorary table or something like that. But this is where all of his sort of pictures of him flying in Harrier jets, and you name the plane, he's been in it, goes here. So he's a huge lover of planes. And there's sort of lots of little trinkets dotted all over the place, really. But mostly in this room, it's pictures of our family, and you know, it's a really wonderful and kind of personal space to us, which is heaven. I think the thing I love most about Belvoir, I mean, there are so many things, but I think the funny thing about despite having grown up here, is every time I drive up the drive, my mouth always drops to the floor in some way, shape or form, because I think it's so extraordinary to think what Elizabeth and her husband and the people that built Belvoir, they didn't have the same kind of machinery as we do now. They didn't have anywhere near the kind of mechanical engineering that we have now, but it's still standing and it's just so beautiful. And I think, you know, in general, sort of architecture of their day was just so much more romantic and beautiful than it is today. So I'm always in awe and kind of astounded really by my ancestors and what they managed to create. But I think what I love most about Belvoir probably is actually the surrounding area. I love the landscape that sort of coexists and almost holds Belvoir. The woods that wrap around the castle, it's almost like the castle's sort of fully incubated really in its landscape and situated in its landscape in such a beautiful way. The other big thing that I adore are the stories. There's just such an amazing array of incredible people that have come before me and my family, and it's just really inspiring to learn about their stories and their history and what they did for the castle, what they did, you know, in their careers. So many of them had such fascinating careers in politics. They were great artists of their day. So I think I'm constantly inspired by their stories and learning about them. I'd probably spend the rest of my lifetime learning about all of them, but there are just a particular few that I sort of really hone in on and learn most about. But yeah, it's the stories and it's the surrounding and the setting I think is extraordinary. I think home is really what you make of it. And I think home is a space where, at least for me, I really want to come in and feel kind of enveloped by the space and sort of almost hugged. Like I like the space to feel welcoming and cozy and warm and colourful. And I love sort of a litany of textures. And yeah, I think kind of that classic cliche, home is where the heart is. I think it's got to feel like you're a reflection of you, at least for me it does. And I really want to feel kind of inspired by the books that are on my shelves, the paintings that are on the walls. I'm very sort of particular about that kind of thing. It's partly because I grew up around some incredible people and portraits and some incredible books on the shelves dating back to the 1400s, and I think, like in my own way, creating my own home as I am now and will be later this year, I think those kind of things are going to be what I take with me. That inspiration is going to be what I take with me from growing up here, because they were so particular about where things went and how they were hung, and that kind of thing has definitely stayed with me.